7th chapter of Ezekiel. I'm going to read the first and the second verses and deal with this very familiar episode this morning. 37th chapter of Ezekiel. The hand of the Lord was upon me and carried me out in the spirit of the Lord and set me down in the midst of the valley which was full of bones, and caused me to pass by them round about, and behold, there were very many in the open valley, and lo, they were very dry. The hand of the Lord was upon me, carried me out in the spirit of the Lord, and set me down in the midst of a valley. We want to talk about in the midst of a valley. In the midst of a valley. Carried me out in the spirit and set me down in the midst of a valley which was full of bones. The great distinction between Ezekiel's prophecy or his prophetical experiences and that of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, and others has to do with God leading Ezekiel through and by visions. That's where the distinction lies. If we were to break it down, as you've heard me perhaps said before, and certainly I've said before, or you may have read, if we broke it down, we would call Isaiah the eagle-eyed prophet. We would call Jeremiah the weeping prophet, and Daniel the praying prophet. But we would call Ezekiel the prophet of vision. He is the prophet of vision, for God dealt with him through visions. Thus, with the other prophet, what they hear determines what they say. God speaks to them, and they speak to the people. But with Ezekiel, it's what the prophet sees that determines what he says. God does not simply speak to him, God shows him. And then that determines the text of his message. His messages come through the visionary experience, for he is indeed a prophet of vision. The Bible speaks much of visions. In fact, there's a favorite passage that goes that without a vision, the people perish, meaning that God deals with visions. And I don't know whether we live as close to God as our parents and great-parents and all did. I'm sure we probably do. It's probably a different day and age. But they talked more about visions. They talked more about, rather than say, I have a hunch, I have an opinion, they used to say, God showed me. That meant something to do with vision. God showed me that that was not the right job for me to take. God showed me that I was going to get into trouble. Not just God told me, but he showed me. God brought it before my eyes. And you've heard people say that. I've known people to pick up a phone and call folk and say, how you doing? So I'm doing pretty good. Why? Because God showed me you last night. You ever heard anybody say that? Have you ever had that experience? God showed me. I knew my child was in trouble because God showed me you. I knew that something was wrong because God showed it to me as clear as anything. And God is still the same God. God has not changed. And if we live close to him, God will show us things. And that thing about showing has to do with vision. God will show you. He promised he wouldn't let anything slip up on us, and promised he'd take care of us. And not only do you have to hear a voice, but God will show you something. And you'll see it just as clear as the hand before your face. Prophet Ezekiel was one God dealt with. Therefore, what he had to say depended largely on what he saw. And yet, in this, the most popular of his visions, this one in the 37th chapter, before we get to what he sees, we are told where he is. He carried me out. The hand of the Lord is upon me. He carried me out by the Spirit and set me down in the midst of a valley, which was full of bones. The location of Ezekiel becomes important before he gets to what he wants us to know and what he's trying to tell us. We find him down in the valley. And look how vivid this is. Look how portable, meaning carry, this is. He lifted me up, carried me out, and set me down in the midst of a valley, which was full of bones. That's a visionary experience, isn't it? Not only did he show me something, but in the spirit, he lifted me up. And those of us who have been down and out know that God can lift you in the spirit. I mean, if you've ever been low in spirit, you know God is able to lift your spirits. You ever got up on a day where it looked like it was the wrong day and looked like I should have just stayed where I was, and Lord, if I had a few more hours, I'd have stayed in bed because everything is going wrong. And looked like the day when everything was disastrous. And all of a sudden, while you were in that low spirit, God came along and lifted you up. Ezekiel said, there I was. I was caught up with the fact that we were in captivity. And it made me feel bad because we were people who had lost their homeland. We were people oppressed. He said, but the Spirit of the Lord carried me out and set me down by the hand of God in the valley. And then when I got down in the valley, I had to see a deplorable sight. So where he is determines what he's going to see. And what he sees is going to determine what he's going to talk about. In other words, that's the chain of it. The hand of the Lord is upon me. Now, unlike Moses, Elijah, Abraham, who had mountaintop experiences, Ezekiel is set down in the midst of a valley. And listen what the scripture says. It's an open valley. Nothing on either side of it. And it's so open that I don't even have the pleasure of having the shade of a close mountain. I'm set down on a close mountain. I'm set down in an open valley, and midst means middle. Where two or three are gathered together, there will I be in the midst, mean I'll be there in the middle. The Bible uses it. He's set down in the middle of an open valley. Down in the middle of an open valley. A valley is a lowland. It lies between hills or mountains. A valley is one that is an area that's drained by the river system. And therefore, valleys are dry lands. And they're the ultimate in hollowness. Therefore, to be down in an open valley is to be down in already a dry land. A land that is in need of moisture. A land that is not protected. And he's in the open valley. And you're a target for anybody who's trying to get at you if you're in an open valley. You have nowhere to hide, no place to hide. It is drained, it is dry, and he's down there in an open valley. The mountain is usually up. Therefore, valleys are down. He is having the opposite experience of what Elijah and Moses and Abraham had. God called Abraham up on Mount Moriah. God called Elijah up on Mount Carmel. God called Moses up on Mount Sinai. And when he called them up there, he inspired them with a mountaintop experience. But Ezekiel is set down in the valley. And therefore, he is in opposite position. Mountains mean ascension, going up. Valleys mean descension, going down. Mountains mean rising and climbing. Valleys mean falling down. Usually, one can fall in a valley where one can climb up on a mountain. And yet, this is the location of God's prophet. And this is where, I want you to see him this morning. He's not on Main Street. He's not up on top of a mountain. He's not in the temple. He's not around an altar. He is down in a valley, in an open valley. And the valley has around it dry bones. Oh, what a situation. How could our prophet, how could God's servant have fallen down in such? He had already appealed to God to help his people and bless his people. He was carried away into captivity. He sat by the river Kabar and he watched as God dealt with him. He has seen the wheels in the middle of the wheel. He has seen the roll that he as the Son of Man must eat and speak to the children of Israel. But now in the 37th chapter, instead of things getting better, things have gotten worse. Ezekiel has pondered the question of whether God is still with them. Silence has gripped the land. Nobody is praying, and harps are hung on willow trees, and nobody seems to be praising God. There's not an altar in sight as Ezekiel looks around. He is wondering about the plight of his people. What has happened? How could God's people have strayed so far? How could God's people have fallen into such bewilderment? And I don't care how righteous you are, when things get really shown up rough with you, you begin to wonder, Lord, what happened? I go to church, I sing on the choir, I serve on the usher board, I'm a deacon, a trustee, I put my money there, I put my time there. Why is it that I suffer so much? Look like other folk are having things better than I'm having them. Is there anything wrong, God? And you can say that until after a while you begin to feel it on the inside. If you've never been in despair, then you can identify with what I'm talking about. If you've never been in a hopeless situation or a situation that seemed hopeless, then you don't know what I'm talking about. If you've never had to wet your pillow with midnight tears, if you've never had your heart broken, then you don't know what I'm talking about. But if you know something about bending your knees in the midnight hour, if you know something about being crushed down to the point that you felt that nobody cared about you. If you ever been on an island where it seemed like nobody was there and you couldn't hear anybody pray, then you know what I'm talking about. Prophet looks around in bewilderment, and all of a sudden he's swept up by the hands of God, carried out by the Spirit, and set down in a valley. When his eyes are open, he beholds nothing but dry bones. How could I have gotten here? What has happened to the life of the people? What has happened to civilization? What has happened to growth? What has happened to God will be with us always? What has happened to the altars? What has happened to the appeal coming from God's people? What has happened to the fact that we are the blessed? We are God's own servants and we're God's own people. Find myself in a valley and with nothing but dry bones. If I have a conversation, it has to be with the bones that are drained. If I were to have a service now, it has to be with the bones that were dry. Down in dead man's valley, in a gulf with nothing but dry bones. And the Bible lays stress on it. He said, and lo, they were very dry. Not just dry, but very dry. What is the difference between dry and very dry? Well, it must be that they're drained of anything that would give them moisture. Therefore, they're drained of anything at all. And you know, with things facing us today, look at our president. Our president is struggling. He has given an ultimatum that we are going to be in war by January if things are not better. Congress is saying you can't do that, Brother President. You can't declare war because it is written in our Constitution that the Congress that supports the president must agree on war. But the president has gone forth without a Congress meeting, without the backing to say that we can't take anymore. Then you flip the papers over and you see that the Central Park rapist case is still going on. Then you flip it to the next page and you find out that wars and rumors of wars. You find out that people are still being mugged and robbed and raped. You flip the papers over and you find out there's unrest, not only in Washington, D.C., but there's unrest everywhere. And that we stand on the brink of not just a war over there in Saudi Arabia, but we stand on the brink of a worldwide confrontation. That communism has raised its head again and practices across the pages that those who defy God's word have begun to come up. 5%ers, we thought they were dead 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. They're beginning to rise once again. Infiltrate our mind. People are trying to hold on to whatever they can hold on. The valley seems to be desolate. The valley seems to be as if there is no light. Somebody got to get up and praise God. Churches are trying to worship, trying to do the best they can. Freedom Bank has fallen and people are falling down. They're losing faith in themselves. Every time black people try to get something, it's snatched away from them and torn away from. We find ourselves in an open valley where we can't hear anybody pray. We look around and try to talk